All right, I'd like to welcome Quinton Maldonado to class. I first met Quinton up at Bellingham. Quinton, you are an alum, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah, in
Or I
the
was at that time.
right. And then after meeting him there, we co-taught a couple of classes, and then Quinton went off to Philadelphia for his master's degree. And now you moved over to New York City. I love your work. Been following your career ever since I met you, and I'm so happy that you can present your work now to class. So that's not much of an intro, but I want to turn it over to you, Quinton.
Thank you, Dana. I really
Yeah, thank you for
appreciate
being here.
that. Yeah, like like you said, we've been working both just as collaborators and just general peers for a minute now. I went to Western, got my BFA in studio art with a focus in photography. When I was there, I was specifically focusing on digital art, glitch art, kind of new media things, as well as a lot of 4x5, and that'll show up in the presentation. Then went to Philadelphia a few years later, got my MFA in studio art, and doing a lot of also like kind of light, sound, video. So to me, photograph or photography is sort of like always been like a linchpin of a lot of the work that I've done, taking the sort of photographic mindset, which I think kind of boils down to like how do we engage with like light, space, and time. And so that's kind of where I want to begin. Let me pull up my presentation here. Oh, I went to the Tyler School of Art. I should say that because I just said I went to Philadelphia.
School of the
And there are
Streets.
lots of schools in Philadelphia, so I don't want to steal anybody's valor by any means.
Quentin, since it is just such a small group, is it all right if Cassie or I jump in with questions at any time?
Absolutely, yeah, please. I
Cool, thank
am
you.
always happy to do a little bit of more just kind of dialogue. So if anything sparks a thought or whatever, please just let me know. Okay, so this is so to begin my presentation, this is a composite image that I did. I graduated at school in 2020, so during the pandemic, or graduated with my MFA during the pandemic. And so this was like a rolling project that I had been doing, taking a screen cap almost any time that I was on screen in class. And so my work definitely like it goes back and forth between a lot of 35 millimeter, which is just like one of my loves, but also trying to engage with screens, uh, digital cameras, uh, the internet in different ways. And so this is like probably on one extreme end of that. And then the next, you can see here, this is like where they come together. I have a love of Polaroid, one of my favorite things, but you can see here, this is a setup that I had created, or it's capturing a setup that I had created with a few of the undergrad students at Tyler, making this like relay system of different cameras and TVs and the lighting studio to create a video piece that we'll be able to get into a little bit later. Hello, Stella.
Hello.
Uh, just about to get into the portrait section of my little talk here, but if you have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to butt in. I'm always happy to answer anything or to, discuss. Uh,
Awesome.
and
Thank you.
so, um, so I love the lighting studio. I think the lighting studio is just a wonderful place to like really expand and kind of hone my craft as a photographer. It's a little, I think at certain points of my photographic career. I thought that it was a little bit too maybe obvious in a certain respect. Like you see certain like especially like 35 millimeter artists who like your Robert Franks and people who are like out hitting the street. You want the action, the aliveness of like the world and everything. But there is something really beautiful about like the slowness of the studio that I think is uh has this ability to really express something a little bit more refined, or maybe refined is the wrong word, but like uh you can control the photographic plane in such ways that I think it's really interesting. And uh for me, two of the base elements that I'm really interested in photography, uh or maybe like two ideas, is like light, but also about the gaze. And so I draw a lot of inspiration from like Renaissance portraiture as well as like classical lighting setups and everything. You can see here that this is done in like this is a 35 millimeter image of a photography student back at Tyler, Devon. And so he's also a fantastic 35 millimeter 2.25 artist. Does a lot of really interesting things, but I was in a lighting class and I made it my mission to sort of like do all of the assignments using 35 millimeter, which I realized in retrospect was a little psychotic because everybody else was using digital. But as an MFA student, I was like, I've got to add like a little extra sauce onto this. Uh, and so it sort of like sent me down like a path of like, since I couldn't see what I was going to be getting immediately, I had to really like wait and kind of look back and forth and spend a lot of time thinking about like what is the angle that I'm looking at here? What's the sort of like presence that I'm having in front of this person or they're having in front of me? And I think that that's also where like the notion of like the gaze really becomes important in my work because I think a lot about like Lara Malfi. It's one of the most genius like sort of critical theorists in my opinion. She's got a lot of like really interesting writing. She's the one who coins the phrase the male gaze. And that concept that she brings out is about this way in which like lens-based media has this ability to like capture. And by capture, it also like defines and aestheticizes, it turns into this sort of fetish object, like especially like the female body. And I think that as a photographer, that's a thing that I struggle with a lot is like wondering about what the position that I am in when I'm taking photographs of people is like, how am I portraying them, but also how am I looking at them? And how do they look back at me? Because I think that that's the thing that allows us to sort of escape that sort of trap of being like, oh, photography is just this thing that like is this one directional kind of relationship. It can be stultifying in a certain respect to feel like all you can do is like capture and never fully. Uh, and so this is my friend Charlotte, and Charlotte is a movement artist. She lives up in Hudson, New York right now, doing a lot of workshops and things. And she and I met back in Bellingham, actually. And uh, one of the things that we always talk about is like the nature of the body and how it's presented in like the subtlety and like movement just from one little like a side glance to like just a light tilt changes the entire relationship that you feel in front of these people. And I think that for me, that's a really important part of uh, photography and like trying to expand that type of emotional relationship, because there is always like the fictive quality whenever we're making a portrait, right? Like the portrait is there to make us almost believe that we are like that space expands in both directions beyond the picture plane, that we're somehow like in this new space where we're there with the person that we're encountering in the image. Uh, and I think that that's just like one of the magical elements about like, I mean, this is like the Walter Benjamin sort of like the presence of, or like the aura of the work of art in that respect, or like the person that we are seeing, and like we feel like we know them in some sort of way, like an emotional know that doesn't have like maybe a language put to it, because the image is able to articulate this like specificity uh in a particular moment that the ever moving like forward momentum of time sort of like washes away. uh and so this is an image of my friend Austin, and this one is on 4x5. The other one was also, or the one of uh Charlotte was on 35 millimeter again. And the photo professor at Western, Garth Amundsen, always uh, like says that people love a blurry photo. They're always so flattering. And so so this is a blurry photo of her. And Austin is a fantastic sculptor. She's like a painter. I met her at Tyler as well. And um, I think that the contrast, like just having her tilt in just a little bit and changing the depth, like I love using fixed lens cameras because they force you to either get up into somebody's like personal space, or you have to move your body in some sort of way, or you have to like you wait for the moment in which like something happens and you're like, that's the moment. And so uh these two are taken just slightly apart, but I mean, because they're both individual 4x5 films, like the distance of time between these moments, even though it could be just like on film it looks like it could have just been like a second apart, is like, you know 5-10 minutes apart, because of the process of the camera and the apparatus like gives you this time to like rework and like reimagine the space of what you're trying to create. Uh, and then instant film, love instant film. This is my friend Mirna, who is also a sculptor, or graduated from the sculpture program at West, or Tyler, excuse me, too many names. And so she had this big piece of fabric that she was wanting to do with, and or do something with, and I was making a bunch of light installations and had these different light boxes that I was building. Uh, and so she came into one of the rooms when I was doing an installation and just laid on top of it with the fabric. And so uh, it was like a perfect photo opportunity. And so I think that this one is like, or this image is one of the ones that really like makes me think about that like reciprocity of like looking or being seen, because you see the just like flicker of her eye over the light, and it just like, I don't know, it's just incredibly powerful. And this way in which uh like the notion of like the turning into the subject of another person like uh removes an element of agency, but I think that photography also gives it back, or it has the possibility of giving it back, when you as the viewer are no longer allowed to hide. uh, from the person that you are seeing. The voyeuristic kind of quality of photography, like this idea that you can like peep into people's like lives or business without sort of ever feeling it turned back onto you. There are photographs that have the ability to do that, and I find them the most captivating personally. Um, Next, this is my friend Wesley, uh, who lives down in Philadelphia. Uh, and this is another engagement with the screen. Like this was taken digitally using a CRT TV, and that kind of mediation is one of the things that really fascinates me as I've sort of grown in my process. I think it's taken a more central role in my work in later years in comparison to some of the earlier photo stuff. But it's got like a little stop button up in the corner because I was using like that relay system from that first image to create this image. And uh, there's a thing that photographers do when they'll shoot like medium or large format, which is like leave the black border around the edge. And this is sort of like a stamp of like, this shot is so good that I didn't have to move anything or like didn't have to crop or whatever. Uh, and to me, I think that there's like, I don't know, there's like a light humor in the possibility of photography as well, in which like those types of visual languages get blended in together where you see like things like moire effects, pixelation, or these different sort of like technological things that we normally try to erase, but like their presence itself gives this sort of like low fidelity stamp of authenticity, or like a type of like uh the camera becomes like the witness or something. Uh, and so with that, I'm going to move on to architecture. Uh, and so I love taking architectural photos. Like the studio is this one thing that I think is like this exercise of control and uh, discipline, but also engagement with another. But a lot of my architectural work becomes sort of the opposite of that, in which like uh, it's much more about kind of exploration and this editing process is, I mean, let me move on to the next image, I'll say. So this was like an abandoned storefront that was in Bellingham. Uh, and so one of the things that I think a lot about when it comes to architectural photo and like that ability of like the 35 millimeter camera does have this like freedom of mobility to it is that emptiness is this thing that the camera has this ability to uh, highlight in the world, or like there's a like a ghostly quality to these types of commercial empty spaces that I don't know, I find them eerie, but also there's something kind of like melancholy or tragic about them as well. Because there's this what am I trying to say right now? I'm sorry. I lost my note. But I think it's this kind of tension between the built environment, which is this thing that is supposed to like contain life or retail or this activity. And a lot of my images of architectural space or like of openness is kind of that like wastelandy quality. I think there's like almost like a type of urban desertification of like the spirit in a way in which we transform the natural world into these kind of like open spaces of concrete. And uh, unfortunately, like when that happens, I mean, you see like certain elements of resistance and like the way in which, like in this image, the parking lot becomes cracked and there is this still like greenery around, but places like malls or parking lots or abandoned like complexes and things, like once that's happened, it becomes this new kind of like, it's like a scar almost uh, on the built environment in which like uh, there's a void that is left over, this remnant that uh, humanity is sort of like moved beyond. Uh, this image here was taken in Philadelphia. I find taking images of like these, I think they're called like, I don't know what the real name of the architectural style is, but uh, I've always referred to it as developer core, where they're oftentimes just like these single, like like one bedroom or studio housing for essentially like mobile millennials or Gen Z people who are coming up, like very like mobile workers, quasi professional class type of things. And they're put up all over the town or all over cities. Like you see them here in New York, you see them in Philadelphia, they're kind of stretch up and down the East Coast. You would see things like this also like popping up, I'm sure, in Bellingham and Seattle. Uh, and they're designed intentionally to be kind of like built super cheap, uh, be placed anywhere. And it's, I think, a dual sign because on the one hand, there's this uh, French sociologist, Marc Aguirre, who talks about the idea of like the non place, which is that there are non places all over the world, which are essentially just like spaces in which capital has homogenized in such a way to like maximize its own flow. And so these places he talks about are kind of like airports, malls, um, like the freeway to a certain extent. Like uh, they have like a nondescriptness because their function is not to like actually house life, but to move money essentially, or commodities, product, whatever. And the turning of domestic spaces into that is a sign of the way in which like people's lives have become so thoroughly like frictionless to the whim of capital. I mean, I'm here in New York right now, which is like in comparison to places like where I came from, like the Tri Cities in Washington or Bellingham or something. It's like uh, the job opportunities are significantly more than a lot of those places. Like or the opportunities to like be able to get into either an industry or a career or anything like that because of the nature of like what the city contains. But at the same time, like that creates drains on certain areas of society. But while uh, prices of wages for a lot of people who still live in small towns uh, goes up, but the wages stay down. So it's like, and so I think that there's something a little sinister about these kind of like incomplete spaces because they signify like a, I don't know, like a, this turnover, this, or a turning towards like finance capital and this like turning away from community because it's not like people who live here want this to happen. it's usually a sign like it's been created by banks and landlords or like developers who have no accountability to the people who live there. And so uh, this image is just one of my favorite images of Philadelphia because this is just like very classic Philly, honestly. Uh, because you see giant, this was like uh maybe 50 feet away from my house. Uh, and unfortunately, you see this type of thing happen all the time where uh, landlords or property management companies will tear up big street portions of the street to install gas lines and things, and people will like these private public corporations will come and do that, and then the people who are supposed to come to fix that just don't show up for weeks, and so you just have giant holes all over the city. It's ridiculous, but it is just like you learn to sort of navigate it. And I think that there's like the use of the flash in this image, I think is just like it's my own expression of just how like crazy it is, or like it makes you feel when you're just like you will go on your daily walk or like pass by a place that you go all the time, and then all of a sudden there's like a giant ditch there. And it's like the contrast is really striking. um and so this one is actually a more experimental image. I love the use of like degraded film as well. I think that that's really fun to use uh like old film stock that doesn't like that's been highly degraded or like you don't know entirely what's going on and doing like different types of exposures and stuff. Uh and taking photos of like I guess it has this kind of like this was also shot on an autograph too, which I don't have mine around here somewhere, but it is like very classic, super cheap bellows camera that you can really pull some interesting images because the glass on them, like they're so simple that they'll basically always work, but you never know what the glass is gonna do. Uh, and so I find it like really interesting. There's almost this type of like time travel-y or like dreamlike quality to documenting spaces, especially like this was around Billy Frank Jr., kind of like where the karate church is. And a lot of the like architecture, like those basically slum houses that were all around there, like a lot of that shit doesn't exist anymore. They've all been turned into like now like quasi like on the outside fancier looking slum houses basically. Uh because you know certain things don't ever change, but photography has that kind of like there is always the kind of ghostly or like the presence opens up like a time portal to testify that uh the present has not always ever been, or the present has not always been. And I think that that can be confusing because it feels so uh, true to look around the world and to assume that it just is. Uh, but like one of my favorite photo series is like the Sugimoto theaters, and I don't think any of those theaters exist anymore. And so his images become the sort of like last testament to all of these like beautiful movie uh like movie theaters and the meta element of this kind of like watching and absorbing, but also they're kind of like the end of the picture is also the end of these kind of like theaters themselves.
I don't show those in class, and I realize maybe I should. I love those images. Cassie or Stella, have either of you seen the Sugimoto movie theater series images?
No, I haven't. I have. Those are amazing. I love those. I like. all of his work is super cool, but those ones were cool. Is he the same one who did the like museum shots too from like the Natural History Museum? I don't, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So Cassie, what he would do, he took a series of images. I guess you could look them up later, but these beautiful sort of old fashioned movie house theaters. Um, and he would open the shutter at the start of the movie and then close the shutter at the end of the movie. So the screen is just this like white square that's emanating all the light and filling the space with light.
Oh,
But
that
yeah, like
does sound really cool.
they're gorgeous. Yeah, you should look them up. But yeah, like Quentin is saying, the end of that image is sort of now that the movie theaters are gone, this sort of like is the end of their existence as well.
Mhm.
Sorry,
Yeah.
turn it back to you, Quentin. Thank you.
Oh, I mean, could talk about that series all day. It's got a lot to just mine as both a aesthetic and also just philosophical exercise, honestly. But that's why he's I mean, one of the greatest of all time. So, uh, yeah. Oh, well, that's the end of that. So, next, have some installation art. And so, I think for me, installation is the thing that where those three elements that I was talking about is sort of like what my idea of like the photographic mindset is, which is that kind of like time, space, and light. Uh, like installation became a way in which like I was able to turn that into no longer just like the flat image, but also just like the type of a greater sort of expanse, like a three-dimensional, almost like feeling. And so this image right here was one of the later pieces that I did. I started experimenting with this black fabric and these different types of light boxes as I was talking about, and uh, got really into the idea of like the type of distinction between uh, being in a room versus being a part of a room. Uh, it's like that idea, and then an idea of like, how do I get people to walk around in a circle became just like my two kind of like uh, uh that was the North Star of my grad school experience. And so getting people to walk around in a circle, this was one of the very first experiments in that. This one is called Blue Reminder, and using like so on the back of the wall there is like a series of like fluorescent LED or like fluorescent lights, black lights in different combinations. Uh, and this room also had on the other side, you can't see it because I didn't actually get a good picture of it, but it's like got a series of amplifiers that are hooked up to solar panels, which was a technique that Dana actually taught me. And so it became like this optotheremin where people would move through these curtains and it would change the amount of light that the solar cells were receiving. And so people's body movement became this way in which like they could play the room, but the curtains also had this become translucent or opaque depending on the angle in which you're standing in front of them. And so it became a way to like get people to move around into each different quadrant and like experience uh like became this sort of like relational dance almost where like you became super aware of where other people were and where you were, and the room also was always telling you that as well. uh so I went from that to making this piece, and this one's called Total Trash. uh and so this is like it's named after, actually both of these installations have been named after different songs. And so Total Trash is a song by the Sonic Youth off of their album Daydream Nation, which is just like, I mean, it's 10 out of 10 for me. But the sort of like destroyed room, I really cut my teeth in a lot of like punk metal spaces, lots of sort of like experience in like basement shows or in like noise and experimental uh like music scenes. And so this became like a way in which like I could play with those ideas because um there's an amplifier there that's actually also playing like a harsh noise like element to it. So when you walk into the room, it is blaring, and so it's a very like aggressive piece. Whereas the other one is like an exercise of kind of like meditation and contemplation as you like relate to the elements of the room. This one was like about, I don't know, the room trying to attack you basically, in the same way that I tried to bring like that explosive energy to it. It also became this like sort of like living and growing piece in which you can see here, these are instant shots of people interacting with the room. So I'd invite people to come down and like take part in painting on the walls or tearing things up or adding in different elements into it. Uh, and so I wanted it to be interactive and also like feel like this kind of uh like you didn't know if you were showing up to the party or if the party had already happened type of thing. Uh and so the photos, even though they're all taken like days, sometimes weeks apart, all give this kind of like it is the false consolidation of this type of like I don't know, like the manufacturing of that idea of like the kind of like punk aesthetic is something that I always think a lot about, as it worked on me when I was a teenager, and now I, you know, uh, have a lot of uh, both empathy, but also a lot of like critique of such a thing.
That's actually
It's,
like a beautiful sentence to sort of encapsulate either all of photography or all of capitalism. You didn't know if you were showing up to the party or if the party had already happened.
oh yeah, that's. I mean, we could definitely spend the rest of the time talking about that, but maybe afterwards, post game. Uh, and so this is my thesis, the thesis work that I created. And so this one, not named after a song, but named after a quote. So this one is called Everything is Somehow Always Preserved. And it's a quote from Freud in which he is talking about like the accumulation of memory. And when he's saying that, he's not meaning like that everything is preserved as in like literally you remember everything that's ever happened to you, but rather that like the person that you are, like your psychological sort of being, is made up of like sediment, and that is an accumulation process of the totality of our lives. And so it's like, so digging back, there's this sort of archaeological element to it. But I also thought about it as like this kind of thing in which like whenever we are entering into a space, there's always this like presence, and there's like an essence of the history of what's been there and how do we become a part of it, uh, by our own sort of like engagement with it. And so I created this like paper lantern, and it has a series of uh, what were they? Like motion detectors. And so like as you walked around the piece, it would sort of respond to you. And so it became this way of like having this relationship of like the room, the movement of the curtains, and like the way in which the curtains also created this sort of like uh quasi interior and exterior. So people were able to always uh like engage and like become a part of, but also move out of that kind of relationship with it. But there was always this sort of like, if you did walk around it, it would kind of move the curtains and you would hear the sound. And so there was this kind of recognition of your being. And that was something that I really wanted to get across with that piece. So there's another angle of it, using some, I think this is the 3200 Ilford Delta, which if you ever get a chance, pick up a roll. It's some of the most fun that you can have shooting 35 millimeter. Next is this rework of that first piece that I showed, or of the first room installation that I did, Blue Reminder. And I think it's important to or like go back and do a work again, or like to re-engage with certain ideas, because I think a lot of the temperature of now is such that like newness is like the thing that's always hot, and like this notion of like originality, and part of that comes out of like, you know, during the early modern era, or not early modern, but like the modernist period, like people would really develop like signature styles, and so you'd make one painting until you just couldn't anymore. And now it's like, if you make a painting that looks too similar to another painting, or if you take a photograph that looks exactly like the last photograph that you did, then you failed somehow. And I just don't know if I believe in that. And so this one has like added elements of like different LED boxes, video installation, trying to like add in mixed media elements, and like kind of expand out the different core ideas and relationships of that first piece, but recognizing that like when I enter into a different space, it's just not going to be the same. And so how do I change the work in such a way that it builds upon itself in that way? And so with that, gonna get into some recent works. Gonna show a little bit clip of this video. This was a collaboration with this woman here on the left, my friend Jasmine Crosby. She and I met in grad school. And so we both have a real fascination with technology, cameras, surveillance technologies in particular. And so, yeah, we'll watch a little clip of this and then we can keep moving on. I'll let the video talk about itself.
Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Main Street Wyoming is made possible in part by grants from Kennecott Energy, proud to be a part of Wyoming's future in the uranium exploration, mining, and production industry, and by the Wyoming Council for the Humanities, enriching lives of Wyoming people through the study of Wyoming history, values, and ideas.
An American invention in the 1870s led to the end of the open range and the settlement of Wyoming. Can you name that invention? Join us on Main Street, Wyoming to find out the stories about barbed wire and brands, two tools that changed the course of Wyoming history. Welcome to Main Street, Wyoming. I'm Deborah Hammonds, and on today's program I have two sets of guests to share their expertise about barbed wire and brands. First, Joe Lawrence from Casper, one of our state's prime collectors of barbed wire, is with us. Later, I'll be talking with Ann Noble and Bill Runner about Wyoming brands. Joe, we are surrounded with just a fraction of your collection of barbed wire. Can you tell me when barbed wire was first invented?
Barbed wire was actually invented in the 1860s, but the true barbed wire, what they call a barb, was invented in the 1870s, and the first patent was 1874 by Joseph Glidden.
So Glidden, that's the kind of barbed wire that we still use today?
Yes, He invented the first barbed wire, had the first patent on it, and that's the one that was very popular then and is still popular today because it was cheap to make.
And so that's what people were looking like. Before that, I guess, what was it about barbed wire that made it so necessary in the settlement of the West?
Well, barbed wire, the reason it was invented is because, the government wanted people to come west and settle the land because there was lots of it. The West was an open range at the time. There were big cattle barons, and so when the settlers came into the West, they needed something to protect their gardens and protect their crops. So this is actually what started barbed wire. There were three gentlemen, Elwood, Hash, and Glidden, all attended a fair in DeKalb, Illinois, in 1873. And not together, but, separately. And these three gentlemen, one was a farmer and one was a hardware man and another one was a businessman. And they all decided separately to build a barbed wire. And what they were looking at the county fair was this barbed piece of wood that actually was barbed with nails and attached to the top of a bench. And they thought, well, now if that's a good idea, but we need something that we can fence our gardens and our lot with. So they turned around and invented barbed wire. The first piece of barbed wire actually was done on a coffee mill. Joseph Glidden took his wife's coffee mill and tore it apart and actually produced the first Glidden barb, which is this barb right here, on a coffee mill.
Isn't that something? So that's whenever you have someone in your house who's an inventor and starts taking apart things and stuff, think it may end up being worth millions of dollars.
And it was.
An idea that changed the West. Well, you mentioned some of these. Now, I know in your collection that...
I'll stop that there.
Yours.
It is on YouTube. If you are interested, I can always send you a link. But this gentleman then starts to talk about more elements about barbed wire. But I think the thing that Jasmine and I found really fascinating about this is this kind of we see the modern, there's a live stream of an actual day in Wyoming, and hearing the sort of story about the history of what is essentially the enclosure. The settlement of the West is also this massive American enclosure of separating the natives and domesticating the land in such a way that it transforms it to the uses of what we understand as sort of the modern American capital state. And we oftentimes don't think about capture technologies as this type of thing that has an origin, or it's maybe explicit purpose whenever we're not directly engaged with it. You can oftentimes see barbed wire or razor wire or these types of chain link all over the place, and they've just become so normalized. And I think that that's a way in which we kind of come to understand these types of like disciplinary architectural forms or like elements. Like we see the way in which uh, barbed wire is this thing that he talks about as like it protects the cattle and keeps them safe, but actually it also like defines like this new, it turns like the boundary of privatized space and settlement into this material and aggressive like form. It materializes it in such a way that it like defines like the inside, that in group, those who seek to dominate against those who were the native inhabitants of the land, but also like the it then controls that land. And I think we see the way in which like surveillance technology, and especially of that like type of disciplinary capture technology, has been utilized the world over, whether it be like to militarize zones in different war-torn countries, or the way in which like walls, razor wire, barbed wire then becomes like the defining boundary between like places like what is happening in the situation in like Palestine, or and it's important for us to be like cognizant, and especially of the way in which like it's so easily just like I don't know, like the glibness that we benefit from it is this thing that I think makes it extra eerie. Is like we see the modern result of that process. That in state is this type of like mundane tragedy of history.
Yeah, the way
And then
she's
I have
so.
other artwork, but unfortunately
Sorry.
we don't have time. I did a show with Jasmine. It was about technophobia, kind of. And we could talk about that in a post game if people wanted to. But this quote right here, what got you started on the internet, is a line from the Japanese horror movie Pulse. Watch it. It's great. And yeah, we'll never be able to talk about that last piece. I'm sorry, Dana.
Too good. Uh, a quick plug where your stuff we can. I've linked to your website within our class. Is that a good spot to kind of review your work?
Absolutely, yeah. It's got all of my, or not all, but most of my work insofar as like video and installation and stuff. Got a lot of other videos that are not uh, uh, PBS talkings, but they're also they range from like I think very beautiful ambient artworks to psychotic right wing paranoia fantasies. So just kind of depends on what you're in the mood for.
How about that for a teaser? Yeah, well, quick before we turn it over to question and answer, I know that we're like butting up against the end of our time. Um, or I wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your work with us. Does anybody have any questions for Quinton? I've got a bunch, but I can ask Quinton anytime. So, Cassie or Stella?
I think I'm good. That was pretty informative.
I was just a little bit curious with your installation pieces.
Mhm.
How did like the actual interaction with the installations from viewers like line up with kind of what you expected or what you intended?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, it's like I really tried to do my best like to really workshop, and there were a number of different installations that I didn't show that, and they range from like sometimes incredibly successful to not so successful. And I think like working out different forms became this way in which like it's like kind of pilot testing each of them until the final one, and like figuring that out is like because the moment that you introduce in audiences, like that's just chaos mode, because people will like always do something that you never expect. Uh, and I think that that's one of the beautiful elements about it. But it's like the tension as well, is that kind of like unknowability of the audience. And I mean, in a certain way, it always expands the work to like have people do things that I'm not never anticipated. Uh, and yeah, in general, like by the final one, I was like very confident because I was like thinking about like the architecture of the room and the like the way that people would walk in. I would like do tests where I would like walk in myself and be like, okay, it's like I remember reading about how like in shopping, like or like in grocery stores, like 70% of people immediately walk in and then go to the left or something. So you always want to put certain foods like right here, and like thinking about like that type of like uh mass psychology of like, okay, what's just like the natural, or like natural, like what is the sort of like imagined condition response that people are going to like have when confronted with this thing. And so uh but also like keeping it simple made it a lot easier for me to get the results that I wanted. When there were too many elements, I knew that it was just like it was getting too busy. Like and I made a few of those where it was like had set up like fractalized like grid systems of like different walls and everything, and it was too much. It just became unwieldy. And so like not being afraid to do the whole less is more type of thing. Sometimes more is more, but you can also just like I think an important thing is just like don't be afraid to let the work do its thing, and to not have the like have the confidence to also just like believe in your ideas or like your original intention. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was my biggest question, but thanks so much. This was super cool.
Quinton, I have an easy one. You talk about using 35 millimeter, and it sounds like both of you have quite a bit of familiarity with photo. So I was going to stop and like ask Quinton to define like 35 millimeter versus 4x5, but it sounds like we don't need to do that. So anyways, my question, you use 35, 4x5, instant, expired film, you use all these things. Are there any photographic medium that you're like, nah, not for me?
You know, I've never owned a 2 1/4. I feel like it's a cool medium. I like that you can get such incredible fidelity. But I also think that it's just kind of like uh relative to the number of shots that you get. I sometimes am like because if I'm like out on the go, I'm shooting. Like it's uh and so like now I have like my Polaroid, and that only gets 8 shots, which is like sometimes feels very limiting. But the beauty of the 35 millimeter is that, man, you get that 30, you get a 36 roll, and you can really just go all day. And like Rolleiflex, or like the like those different types of like square format, like they're very beautiful and like very loving. But I think that they're, to me, just feel I don't know. I've never felt like the connection to them entirely, but I haven't really shot that much of that.
I've got a friend who's also in New York who, like, he's the same. He's like, if I want to shoot, it's 35. If I want high res, it's 4x5. What the heck is 2 1/4 then? I don't need it. But what about Holga? Oh, barely in the frame.
I do have my The Hulk is beautiful, but I got one of these, and this has sort of like become my new toy camera.
Oh,
It's
got
like
it.
Sherman's.
Yeah,
And so this bad boy has shot a lot recently.
got it. Yeah, that looks really fun. That was an easy one. Thanks. That we didn't have to. We had a deep presentation. We need to finish with something light. Um, a quick plug for the photo program. I forgot, Stella or Cassie, if you are seniors, but I am teaching an in-person Super 8 filmmaking workshop this summer. If you're interested in Super 8, that's a good segue from like talking about photo medium. And then also, if you want to go to New York in the summer, the photo and painting professor, Pierre Gore and Garth Amundsen, they're taking a group to New York City in the summer on an awesome trip. Like, I always look over the syllabus for that and wish I could go. So two shameless plugs for the photo offerings. Any last questions for Quinton before we let him go?
I don't
I'm
think
also going
so.
to be meeting up with the class.
Oh, you are in New York. Nice.
Yeah, I mean it's a hop and skip away from me.
That's
So
true, yeah.
even though they're going to be in Manhattan, but I live in Queens, and Manhattan, it has the word man in it. That's really all you need to know.
Oh my goodness. Very good. Okay, sorry, I kind of stepped on your lines, Cassie. You said you're fine.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for showing up live, Cassie and Stella. I really appreciate your time today.
Yes, thank you both so much. I very much appreciated it.
All right, I'm stopping recording. Cassie, Stella, I will talk to you later. I'll be reviewing your composition images today and sending you video messages. So you'll get that soon.
Talk to you later. Bye.